This week we have witnessed the only episode of Doctor Who Flux not to be written solely by showrunner Chris Chibnall. In Village of the Angels, the fourth episode of this 6-episode serialised Doctor Who series. Talking about this fourth episode today will be myself, Neo from Australia, along with Ingiga from England, and welcoming Tome from England as well. Tome, let's start off by asking what you liked about this episode.
Yeah, well, quite a bit. I was feeling pretty positive about it in the sense that I think it was as good as I could hope for from a Chibnall Era Angels episode, with the praise and caveats that suggests. Some of the things I most enjoyed about it were the fact the way that it didn't just feel like it borrowed from Blink, which we sort of saw a little bit of last week with the sort of video game Angel. But it really did feel like Alderton and or Chibnall as well was sort of aware of some of the other Angel qualities and powers and so on that we'd seen in the Series 5 and Series 7 episodes, and drew on those. So that was one of the things I was kind of most happy to see in terms of this episode, Yeah.
Gig, what did you like about this one?
Mainly, I liked the visuals, and I just felt that generally there was a sense that they were willing to be a bit creative with the visuals and such, which is maybe not all that common necessarily in Chibnall Who. And also just the tone of it. I felt that in terms of tonal control and just keeping things coherent tonally, I felt it stuck out in terms of Chibnall Who episodes on that front. Like, I felt it was carried by tonal control enough pretty much to distract you from the story or lack of one, as the case may be.
For me, I liked the Bell scenes. I liked the guy from the Inbetweeners she was playing off, and I liked the kind of satanic Azure seduction to the passenger stuff scenes. I liked the thing with the credits cutting out the percussion. People are identifying this as they're cutting out the heartbeat, the Time Lord heartbeat, because of the end of the episode. I think that's cool. And there were some neat angel ideas and angel imagery for sure. Yeah. Oh, what I really liked, something I did like a lot, was how it tied itself to the episode date, 21st of November, the same way the Halloween Apocalypse tied itself to the episode date. This is another reason I think these episodes, I know I beat this drum a lot, but why I think these episodes are asking to be judged week to week as singular episodes transmitting week to week, because Chibnall so directly asphyxiates them to the actual time of transmission, much more so than other showrunners. So I really like that aspect. Very temporal, very specific. That was really cool.
Yeah, definitely is something we've seen sort of a little bit before, haven't we? With, like you say, Halloween, but then also kind of, I guess, the Moffat set a few episodes on the same date as their...
Yeah.
I want to say the
Big Bang was
Big Bang, and then Impossible Astronaut, and there's a few of those. But Chibnall's kind of been doing that a bit more recently as well.
Yeah, I feel a bit of a role reversal here, because I felt like I was defending or liking episodes 1 and 3 more than a lot of people I've been talking to, but I had a harder time with this one than people I've been reading or people I've been talking to, mostly because I felt at a remove for the actual village stuff. I wasn't getting a lot out of the characters, out of Claire, and the story was just kind of, things were a bit flat to me. Stuff like towards the end, how we get Peggy revealed as the old woman, I thought we were meant to know that already, but then the episode kind of plays it, and I think it was trying to play it as a twist. I wasn't sure exactly. There are a couple of things like that where I wasn't sure how I was supposed to be connecting with it. A lot of the 1900s early stuff I felt was kind of muddled as well. And I think what I keep coming back to is I'm seeing a lot of the talk around the episode and the bits that might have been saggier or more compressed than other bits is talk about how this is part of Flux, so it's part of a serialized thing, and it's a co-write between Alderton and Chibnall, so therefore the idea might be Alderton had a cool idea that got kind of sliced down a little bit to include these Flux things. I cut up the episode myself into the different scene areas to see how much that came across. If you cut out all the Bell and Vinder and the intro and the angel and the TARDIS and the credits and all this kind of fluxier stuff, the episode still comes to 43 minutes, which is pretty much a regular Doctor Who episode, because these are extended 55-minute ones this series. Yeah, so I feel like there's a regular episode's worth of Doctor Who in the Village stuff, and it wasn't an episode I was vibing with heaps, but I'm interested to know what you guys thought of the actual main Village, non-Fluxy, non-Bell and Vinder stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely seen that argument floating around as well, that it was kind of, this was a regular standard issue standalone for the original Series 13 that was sort of repurposed, which obviously, we have no way of knowing if this is the case. I can see why people feel that way. It definitely kind of, you can perhaps see which are the more Alderton parts of the story, which are the more Chibnall ones. So I can sort of see how people were coming to that conclusion, although you have to be a bit careful about that kind of thing. But yeah, I also found some of the Village stuff felt sort of fairly flat. I mean, I think the Peggy thing that you pointed out really doesn't work very well. Like you say, this reveal toward the end, it sort of feels like it's there because, well, A, because sending people back in time is just one of the things angels do, so you have to have that. And B, because it's sort of one of their modes is, causing slightly sad, melancholic scenes of, oh, look how much your life has gone by, kind of thing. Because we've seen that before in Blink and so on. And I guess with Amy and Rory. But yeah, it feels perfunctory, I think. It feels like it's sort of lip service to that idea.
The stuff in the Village, but outside of the house with Jericho, I felt had potential. But then I felt so much of the Village plot was just inside the house with Jericho, continuously doing variations on the angels are doing this now, the angels are doing that now. It's why I don't feel like the time argument makes much sense here, because I felt like the episode had loads of time in that house that it spent just, well, now the angels are doing that, now they're coming out of this, now they're coming out of that. I would have liked to get more of a sense of Claire or of Peggy. I feel like Jericho, we got characterization for, we got stuff for him.
And it's a nice performance, yeah.
Yeah, it was absolutely. Claire felt like such a cipher to me. Her whole status in this series is weird. So, can someone explain to me what her scene in the Halloween apocalypse actually is? How does it relate to her?
Basically, the angel gave her instructions, almost like brainwashed her to find this random street in Liverpool and look for the Doctor and the TARDIS, and just, I don't know, just come up to the Doctor and say some weird shit like that. I don't know. We all got the impression that it was a usual, like Sally Sparrow at the end of Blink, saying, oh, we've met before, you'll meet me in your future, or whatever. And, of course, it turns out to not be that, but to be something that just resembles that, but is actually just completely just random, which is that the angel just gave her premonitions to do that. And it's one of those Chib-esque things. It's like, I guess it reminds me almost of the Brendan stuff and how in Timeless Children that was revealed to have been transmitted to the Doctor by the Master, and how that was such an unreveal and just so unintuitive, and it was just that kind of weird storytelling returned. And I think it's another one of those elements that's kind of grafted on by Chib, because I think Chib really wanted to tease the Claire stuff in episode 1, so people got excited for Weeping Angels and it all felt serialized and shit. But there was just Claire's appearance in Halloween Apocalypse, it serves no purpose. And it's just there are a lot of things in this episode that serve no purpose to the actual central story, but just the whole thing of the Doctor having already met Claire before, it adds zilch to the story. Zilch doesn't affect anything.
Yeah, it's trailery. Yeah,
it's kind of, maybe arguably it's interesting that it's not the timey-wimey, oh, we're meeting out of order thing that you'd expect from this kind of setup. But again, it's like the Sontaran scenes in the first episode and a lot of other scenes in there too. I feel like it was all things that could have just been accomplished with the next time trailer. Like, oh, this is going to be in the series later. I don't know that the premiere needed so many scenes of this. I'm not sure I would call it setup even exactly. And I know a lot of the defense of the premiere at the time was like, this will slot in later. This will make sense later. You'll see how this is actually setting up. But yeah, it felt more to me like they're advertising the Sontarans are in this later, the Angels are in this later.
Yeah, they were teasers.
It's marketing, yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the idea of it making more sense later, and if anything, it makes less sense because, you go back and watch the Claire scene, her dialogue, there's no sort of, oh, you see everything falling into place now because you understand where she was coming from, or you can see kind of the second meaning beneath it that, oh, there's a creature speaking through her saying these words or something. It doesn't have rewatch value in the sense of you watch it again and there's something clever behind it. It's just, oh, well, it's not a Sally Sparrow situation, okay. But it was written like one. So yeah, it's weird.
And the whole thing of the angel kind of projecting itself into her mind and kind of giving her premonitions and stuff, all of that is basically explained through a garbled stream of exposition that she just kind of gibbers to the Doctor in the middle of a sort of tense base under siege sequence. It's all like, it's all off screen. It's a we don't see effect. It's that kind of thing. It's
a shame because I think the idea of like a psychic getting a premonition of an angel, and then because that's kind of an image, it's a mental image of an angel, all that stuff, that feels like a really cool evolution of a bunch of post-Blink angel ideas for me. But yeah, the way it unspooled out here was kind of, it is what it is, yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely one of my favourite elements. I mean, I agree, the kind of way it was communicated wasn't the best, but just kind of conceptually, the idea that, you're having an image of the thing in your mind. So it's not even that, you've looked at its face or, it's kind of crawled in through your eyes or whatever. It's just that you've had this thought, and the thought of an angel is enough to allow it to take root in your brain and control you. I rather love the idea that this might, sort of make lots of kids terrified of the thought that if they think of angels, this will happen to them. Because, anything that sort of traumatizes children in that way is obviously delightful.
It's great. It's like, instead of don't blink, it's don't think. It's like the Inception thing of how getting someone to not think about something is so difficult. If you mention don't think about an elephant, you're going to think about an elephant. I feel like it's a really cool idea. I wish they'd somehow found a way to channel the kind of horror of trying not to think about something more, because it really is a great idea they came up with there, for sure.
See, this thing that we're talking about and evolving the angels to be more of this conceptual threat rather than just, a Doctor Who monster that kind of catches you or whatever. And the way how that builds on what Moffat was doing with the image stuff in The Time of Angels. It seems that all of this relates to making the idea of the angels bigger and more cosmic and more unfathomable and more interesting. And I feel like that is maybe at odds with what ultimately happens to the angels in this episode, which is that we learn that they are an extraction squad working for the division, and they're doing a thing called quantum extraction. Half of the stuff in this episode doesn't actually relate to the Angels' plan with this quantum extraction shit, or a lot of the stuff the Angels do, and a lot of the stuff that happens just feels completely pointless. But like Claire, like the Claire stuff and her backstory, all of it is just sort of spun through so rapidly that, it's all just basically this big mess of things that is just anchored entirely by tone. I think that's just the sort of episode it is.
Yeah, I that is the moment where I sort of said, oh, fuck you, to the screen when they said the division reveal there. I have to admit, it's sort of the elephant in the room. Because, the words, anything as prosaic and pedestrian as extraction squad just does not belong in the same sentence or kind of episode as Weeping Angels. That definitely sort of put a downer on the whole treatment of the angels for me, the division element.
I think I don't want to be like prescriptivist and be like, there's no possible way angels being cops could work. But I think it's that Chibnall has a real thing about cops. He's going back to Law and Order UK, which he did 2 series of back in the day. We've seen him write cops a lot. And we've also seen him write like there's this huge unknowable thing out there. It's so spooky and abstract. And then when he gets around to dealing with it, it's not quite that. Like even the Casavan are kind of set up that way. And there's stuff in Torchwood as well. So it's more like Angel Cops. It's a crazy concept, but it's just knowing how cop stuff tends to get filtered through Chibnall is what really makes me groan at it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, there might even have been sort of better ways of doing it. It's funny because in one of those nice moments of kind of, Big Finish are doing something better than the Chibnall era, there's an example of an Eighth Doctor audio, The Side of the Angels in Doom Coalition, where, the Time Lords kind of have this deal that they're making. The Time Lords during the Time War have this deal that they're making with the Angels, which is basically they sort of give them Earth and all the people to feed on in return for some stuff. I can't actually remember what happens. But the idea is kind of that's how you pay angels off, is you will kind of grant them food sources. And that's kind of cool. I kind of like that. But here there's nothing in that sort of vein. It's just, are they hired goons? What's going on?
even the hotel farm in The Angels Take Manhattan, it's taking what I find the really interesting thing about the Angels is that they like eat your potential. I think that's the really interesting threat and idea about them. Angels Take Manhattan did that big, scary idea of like harvesting humans continuously through that cycling hotel. That was another way to deal with that kind of thing. Here, I felt like the potential for that might have been in the town, like the town getting shunted back, but we didn't really deal with that much. I was confused at the early 1900s part of the town because I felt like we weren't really spending much time or space, whichever swarm would prefer, on how that actually worked out there.
Like, there's sort of this whole thing of, like, everyone in the town disappears again in 1901, and they disappeared twice, and it's the whole thing. And it creates this ambient sense of maybe some looming temporal menace, some a great doom, vague doom floating around involving time travel, which is the sort of thing you expect in an Angels episode set in a small town. But again, it goes nowhere. Like, I mean, this whole thing of, what we do get is the town is in this bubble, this quantum extraction bubble in both the past and the future, and that's there to trap the rogue angel or whatever, or the doctor or whatever it is. But, like, the actual time travel element of that, well, it's just, why is it there? Why do they need to send humans back to 1901 to catch the angel who is hiding in Claire? Why did they need to send Claire back to 1967 in the first place if they caught her in the present day? What? It really kind of defies parsing in any reasonable way.
Yeah, and the way that kind of somehow the village is outside of space and outside of time in both 1967 and 1901, but also the people in 1901, did they get sent further back in time? Like, it's just, none of it seems to intuitively make sense to me, that whole element.
I feel like the actual angel set pieces are done pretty well here. Like, I like the idea of the angel on fire. There's a couple of cool ways they play with the appearance of the angels and the threat of the angels there. But the conceptual stuff, it just feels kind of, it's not there, but it's just kind of shallow to me, because like we're wondering how this potential stuff is really meant to work, how it actually ties in with the village. The village of the angels, like the episode is titled after this village, but I got so little a sense of the village itself. That's why I felt like it was a bit weightless. I was at a bit of a remove from it, because it's not that it's doing the angels badly, it's just I don't feel like it's doing as much with them as it could at all. And there were some bits that just kind of bewildered me, like how does the double kill thing work? I was kind of unclear on that.
I think angels turning you to stone and exploding you if you get touched more than once. I think what that kind of suggests to me is that basically just not knowing what the hell to do and just not being able to commit to what they want the angels to do to their victims. Because in Series 5, in the Time of Angels and Flesh and Stone, Moffat kind of commits to just having the angels kill people. He doesn't try to introduce some time travel element to that story. He's just completely content with having angels just murder people normally in that episode. And as a result, it's mostly coherent. Whereas in this one, the angels get loads of people, but they might as well have killed them for all the good it does and for all that it contributes to their plan. And it just seems like the bit where they explode those two people for no real reason, it just feels like they're trying to make up a reason to have someone die, which is what they want to do, I think, for the whole episode, but they want it to feel like a time travel story, so they don't have them murder people. And again, it's just that general, just lack of coherence, lack of real intentionality to anything, and just, I mean, it almost feels as vague a conceptual, like, set of notes as Orphan 55. It's such a tiny, like, sliver of an actual idea and script and structure for the episode. It's just things being thrown in just fast, willy-nilly, and it doesn't really map together much at all.
Something I did like, we touched on it a bit earlier, was the kind of arresting visual of space and the village next to each other, like the village coming out onto space. I thought that looked cool. And then the kind of split screen thing with the village here and the village there towards the end, I thought that looked cool, but I felt like the stakes of the time getting sent back in time thing kind of loses a bit of edge when you have the settings so like right up next to each other and characters are conversing between them. Like, I know next week we'll deal with some of the fallout of this, but I don't really feel like it's going to be a big deal when it's mostly the time travelers we're seeing there. Peggy's there as well, but we know what happens to her. Yaz and Dan, we know, the status quo will more or less get resolved, even if they have to spend a few years. So the stakes of the time getting sent back stuff didn't land heaps for me with how the episode was kind of visually highlighting their closeness. And then I guess the killing is scary, but yeah, like Gig was saying, it just feels kind of a bit of a mishmash when it doesn't fully commit to it like Series 5 did.
Yeah, the moment that actually that kind of encapsulated the treatment of the angels and kind of what annoyed me about it was it's late on the episode where Peggy is talking to old Peggy or whatever, and I think she says they like to leave witnesses, and everyone's like, witnesses to what? And she says, quantum extraction. And the thing about the angels being cruel and sadistic and liking to leave witnesses and stuff, right? That on its own would be good because it makes sense that we know the angels are kind of cruel and sadistic in the first place, but the idea that they want to kind of spread kind of rumors of themselves and their legend and leave witnesses to spread the story of them and the idea of them, that would slot perfectly well into this idea of them as a conceptual threat. Like if you think of them, they can kind of spawn. That'd be brilliant. But then you get kind of the Chibnall grafted on thing, because it's actually just they like to leave witnesses to quantum extraction.
The way they say it at the same time.
Yeah. And you get the impression that it's just a thing that this division squad of angels like to do because it's just, it's just, I despair of it, really. I despair of that stuff.
I was going to say, just on your own moment of things that you were talking about, you liked visually, and you mentioned the sort of the village floating in space and so on. Definitely, I've seen this comparison come up a few places, but it definitely reminded me of Hyde. Which I think is an episode that sort of haunts this one, as it were. And there's a few similarities. Obviously, the Jericho Claire setup kind of has Hyde vibes. The year is quite close. I think isn't Hyde 1974? So we're sort of very much in that kind of time period. There's this sort of sense as well that it's kind of back. It's the sense that the episode has kind of gone back into a time when old style Doctor Who was on, I think, is in both stories in a way.
Yeah.
That kind of almost like we've dropped into a sort of vaguely classic feeling Doctor Who story kind of permeates this in a way that I think is quite interesting.
The Hyde thing, the issue for me, whether you love or hate Hyde, like Hyde is Hyde. There's no big Series 7 thing to be grafted onto that. If anything, to Series 7's detriment is how standalone the episodes were, perhaps. But in recalling Hyde, it's why I think I enjoyed this episode less than the other ones this series, because this is much more in the shape of a standard Doctor Who story, and so there's not that novelty of like the weirdness of what the Halloween Apocalypse is doing or what last week was doing. This is reminding me of episodes that worked normally on their own terms, and so this being longer than that, and like the Flux stuff is here, but I don't think it's really crowding out the village stuff, because the village stuff gets a regular Doctor Who episode's runtime to itself. So the comparisons to episodes that just had their own terms to work on in series that were all doing that kind of thing, I don't think it's doing Flux any favors necessarily. But I also think that brings up the idea we see of like this mythical pre-Flux script Alderton would have written. I don't think it works that way, because I feel like the timeline for writing scripts, would she have actually written a whole script and gotten paid for it and then had to repurpose it into something else? Or would she just have had like a little treatment, or like just an idea with Chibnall that I'd love to do an Angels thing. Maybe I could do this, that, and this. What do you guys think about logistically this idea that there's like a pre-Flux Alderton Angel episode?
I think there are enough vestiges in this episode that go absolutely nowhere, but just seem to be things that are ritualistically would be included in an Angel episode, but don't contribute to the final story of the Division stuff. And I think that the Division stuff kind of ending so abruptly and just kind of cutting off the episode before it can really go anywhere. I get the sense that there were probably notes, maybe some scenes sketched down, some ideas, which made it in despite not actually being like part of a finished whole or finished idea. I don't think there was a finished full script or story, to be honest, to start with. But I think there were things pointing to potential ones. I think there are lots of stuff in this that seems to be pointing to a potential story that doesn't actually happen. So all the stuff in 1901, the whole idea of quantum extraction, I mean, the idea of being chased around by angels in some kind of bubble reality, a bit like Hyde, that's something you could do with this, but, it doesn't really happen. I mean, essentially, the story in this episode is the Doctor's in the house, she gets chased down the tunnel, she comes out, and she gets caught. That's literally all that happens. So it's like, it does feel like there can't have been that much to start with, but also there maybe was something, but it just got sliced and just like scrapped and whatever.
Yeah, it feels a shame because, I mean, it's kind of what happened to Villa Diodati as well. Obviously, I similarly have no idea of the sort of development of that script and whether that was ever a kind of standalone at any point either. But both of Alderton's episodes have this feeling of kind of, there's something potentially very good in there, of a sort of, this kind of fascinating standalone that's then swallowed up by the sort of heavy lore arc stuff that kind of, is impinging upon it from the following weeks. Obviously, you sort of get that with kind of the way Diodati has to set up the finale of Series 12. It just sort of feels disappointing, really, because, in both cases, I feel that ending element just sort of rather sucks some joy out of it for me.
I think my issue with how we fans like to talk about this kind of thing, it's a bit like last week how I was talking about how, if Moffat wrote this, you would have felt like that, and that's not a thing. There is no Moffat Once Upon a Time to read. It's talking about nothing. It's not talking about the episode, really. I feel like when we talk about Face the Raven before the Clara stuff got into it, when it was just the Trap Street idea, or these theoretical Alderton episodes without the Chib stuff, it's tricky because it's interesting to imagine, but it's not really, like, if we're talking about the episode itself, it's not there. And I think when we start trending heaps into talking about the episodes we didn't get, it's kind of, I don't know, I think it's indicative or something.
I think it suggests that we don't have things to talk about when it comes to the real episode, and we're just trying to talk around it.
Or imagine better versions, or
Yeah. Maybe it's a tiny thing to say, but Amy getting the stone hand in Series 5, that wasn't real, right? That was like a psychological thing.
Yes, it was absolutely not real. It was an illusion. I mean, the Doctor bit her hand to prove that it was not actually stone. So that's very Moffat. Moffat is all about perception, subjective points of view, representing things that are just in the mind and stuff. And I think I can see where you say what you're about to say, because I know where this is going.
Yeah, I'm just saying it's very literal here that she actually gets the stone hands. It's all a bit of a more literal take on the angels.
The detail I loved is that when the dust falls out of her eye onto the sofa, she brushes it away just to flag up that it's real dust. It would have been so easy to just have the dust not be there when she looks back, because that would be pretty much an exact copy of the beat that happens to Amy in Time of Angels. But it's just so much richer and more interesting to have the angel play with your perception and visual language than to just go, the angel literally makes you stone and makes dust come out of your eye.
The mirror scene with the wings, I think, worked quite well, because that does come across more as hallucinatory. They aren't really there. Well, I mean, they look like styrofoam, so there's that. But there's the sense of it kind of being, as you say, her subjective perception, whereas later on, it's just, her arms are just becoming stone and everyone can see this.
I think what it is, this more literal take, it links back to next week with the video games. I feel a real kind of video gamification of them here. Like, we're getting these kind of arbitrary power-up rules, like how they can double kill you now. We're getting the more literal sense of how they actually transform you, or how, that they're moving stuff with their minds. It's like, I feel like they're becoming more of like a video game tangible type threat here, maybe less of the conceptual one. I don't know why that's the way they went down, but yeah.
I mean, even small details, like when we see it come out of Claire's drawing, rather than just sort of stepping out of the frame while we're not looking, like it kind of does to the TV screen in Time of Angels, here we get the drawing kind of glows for a bit, and then the angel like beams itself out of it with a nice special effect and stuff. It is all, again, that kind of literalization of it. I did love the sketch angel, kind of being that holographic graphite projection, and then it gets crumpled up when the Doctor crumples up the paper. I loved that. I mean, just visuals like that, and the angel's hand coming out of the walls in the tunnel. Like, I liked the sense of, I mean, it was possibly the first time in Chibnall Era where I thought, wow, this episode has actually been creative. I can't believe it. Just the and that willingness to throw kind of weird kind of stuff and ridiculousness at the screen, like the graph drawing the angel, the machine as the tech kind of goes haywire, and stuff like that. I think just that general sense of hyperactivity and I guess maybe playfulness. I think that's a big part of the whole idea of like tone carrying the episode, and I think ultimately giving it a more positive reception from people. I think just stuff like that just makes it come off more coherent and more like it knows what it's doing, even if it doesn't.
I suppose, appropriately for the angels, it sort of wins out on the imagery rather than anything else. I mean, I do think it's Jamie Magnus Stone's best working
Yes,
director
absolutely.
by far.
If you told me that this is the same guy who directed The Timeless Children, I would not have believed you.
Yeah. I mean, there was an interesting behind the scenes video where he was talking about his approach to directing the Angels, because he was saying that rather than having them move exclusively in cuts, there were some shots where he would kind of pan past the Angel, or sort of, with a kind of fluid camera movement, and then move. There's, I think, a particular moment where he moves towards Jean and sort of revolves around her, and then by the time the camera comes back round, the Angel has moved.
Yeah, that long take, that's a good moment. That stuck out to me on rewatch.
Yeah.
So, The Division, I feel like, our friend Oliver was talking in the earlier discussions about this kind of, how did he put it? It was comparing the show to Loki and these kind of wider moves of kind of going into institutions and saying everything you knew was a lie, that kind of thing. It was bringing those comparisons into the Chibnall Era, and I feel like we get a similar kind of sense with, like, we're giving the Weeping Angels jobs. you know what I mean? Like, we're turning them into cops. It gives me that same, like, Loki goes and he joins an organization and he's like a time cop now too. The Avengers in general are like cops of their universe. They walk into a HQ and then they go around soldiering on like government connected missions and stuff. It's a very far cry from the old Peter Parker movie style of things. This impulse to put characters and concepts into jobs, I don't know why this is happening. I don't know why this is a popular thing. I know the fact that the MCU does it kind of dictates a lot of other culture will do it, but I don't really know why they're doing it in the first place. What's this impulse to make interesting characters and concepts and creatures into police?
I think it may just be like a limits of the imagination under our like economic system. Just this idea that like people and kind of cultures that can only imagine things and concepts through the framework of jobs, employment, kind of coercion, stuff like that. Like they can't imagine any sort of freer reality or future or existence.
Yeah, it feels like a symptom of a wider societal sort of malaise in that. I mean, I always think of, it almost made me think of the fact that everybody, well, not everybody, you get these kind of online people ranting about Amy and Clara and the sort of lack of clarity with their jobs. It's almost like a sort of flip side of that, if you remember what I mean, of the kind of people saying, oh, Amy keeps changing what job she's doing. Or, Clara's a nanny and then she's a teacher. We didn't see the moment in which she updated her resume or, whatever. And it's kind of bizarre that this is something that people care about that much.
Yeah.
It's as though that, the character is purely defined by their occupation or, it's bizarre to me that's...
Have we even had Dan's job as a plaster clarified in these actual episodes?
No, I think we haven't. I think that's only in extraneous material, yeah.
He's avoiding this kind of narrowing down job stuff. We see that he's hard on his luck and he has less money than we'd like him to, but less time on the job. And there's none of these like Graham-esque moments of relevancy where like his being a plasterer resolves the plot.
Oh God, yet.
Meanwhile, Yaz is being more cop-like in this episode. She's trying to do her whole cop shtick again. She keeps kind of like maybe vacillating back and forth on how much of a cop she is, but it was amusingly useless here because she just got told to fuck off by everyone.
Yeah. I mean, I guess, nice that they remembered that it's there, but it does feel very small fry, very kind of insubstantial.
Dan and Yaz in this episode, like Dan and Yaz, they just get the short end of the stick. They just get complete. Once they encounter the Angel and get zapped, they're dead weight. I mean, they're just bloody nothing happens. They're just parked there till next week. They really just get nothing to do.
Yeah, it's frustrating because I mean, this is the third, I want to say, episode in a row that Dan has been separated from the Doctor, and so the amount of time they've spent together can't be much more than kind of 20 minutes, half an hour or something. They barely know each other. And, what do we learn about him this week? He's got really dry eyes and he throws a stick. That's pretty much it. And he asks questions, I suppose.
So I feel like the biggest casualty of Flux as this shorter series that we've ended up with is just having less time to develop this new companion, to develop his relationship with the Doctor and his life in general.
At the same time, I think it's weirdly kind of fitting, because I think Dan's character is conceived roughly on the same level as the rest of Flux is conceived, which is just kind of basically a napkin. Like, I mean, it's really just it's whatever the opposite of thought through is. It's that. I just feel like Dan is just so kind of reductive a version of the companion archetype that he is actually a fitting match for a storyline about some vague fart cloud that's destroying the universe and time fighting space. You know, I feel like Dan is the sort of companion who fits in this kind of show.
Now we're past the halfway point. Like, we can't say this is just set up anymore. We're past that, you know. We're going to be watching the penultimate episode next week. I think we're past these points where we can say they're just throwing out seeds. So at this point, I want to really think about what's going on in the series. Because what I think is happening, because if I don't pay close attention, I find this happening to myself, is I think a lot of viewers are just having kind of all this plot stuff and these elements kind of roll off them and feel like the same thing because they kind of look similar or they feel similar. But the series is actually doing a bunch of disparate things, because the Flux is separate from the Time Force, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What's the Time Force?
That's the terrible blue particles, isn't it?
Yeah.
The awful CGI, yeah.
That's not the Flux. And Swarm is another actor in this altogether. So the Flux in the first episode looked like it was totally destroying planets. But here we're seeing it's more like an Ascension of the Cybermen, Battle of Ranskor type thing, where it like ravages the planet and then it's all desolate and stuff, but that people can still live on there. So the Flux and the Time thing are doing different things and they're separate threats. I think last week Aswok or someone was saying they're useful as a temporal poison, but we need this space thing to be destroying things even more. So we have particles, we have Flux, we have Swarm. I kind of feel like the series is throwing out a bunch of things that feel kind of the same. Like, oh, there's a big negative force that's eating everything up, but we're getting all this time versus space stuff in the midst of it. I feel confused about what the overarching story is exactly. Do you guys understand this better than me?
This week we had, I mean, the plot of this week's episode, like Angels, basically, it could have happened entirely absent the Flux shit. Like, the Flux stuff, the Swarm stuff, it has absolutely nothing to do with the Division storyline here. Like, if you ignore the Bell and Vinder bits, this wouldn't have to be an episode of Flux at all. And I found that kind of refreshing, because the Flux stuff is, like you say, just kind of this almost redundant kind of mess of different kind of vague doom particles flying around doing vague things. But, like, the fact that Chibnall is also throwing in this Division kidnapping thing in the midst of all that, it's just another thing on top of everything else. And there's just the idea of an overarching story. I mean, I don't know if it can even be called an overarching story at this point. It's just lots of just vaguely tangential apocalypses happening on different levels at once for some reason.
It does feel like the difference between story and plot, doesn't it? I mean, there's a lot of plot. There's huge amounts of plot. I mean, trying to summarize this in kind of TARDIS wiki style would no doubt take kind of pages and pages. But yeah, I have very little sense, as you said, Neo, of what the story actually is and of what its kind of aboutness is. Like, what's it about?
On that point as well, like, the distinction, I think, between this week's Division stuff and all of the Flux stuff is that the Division coming for the Doctor at least extends sort of logically out of last series and Timeless Children and stuff, and there's an emotional involvement, there's stakes for the Doctor in that, whereas the Flux it's just this thing happening off screen somewhere elsewhere. It's just this random thing. And of course, I'm sure we will find out that the Flux is related to the Doctor ultimately. And obviously Swarm is connected to the Doctor, but just the Division stuff seems like it's more relevant to the story that we were telling before, you know?
My main issue with all this, and it ties into the actual Village Angel storyline as well, is I feel like there are these big ideas thrown out, like the Flux is eating stuff and there are these evil time particles and the Ravagers are doing whatever. But the main way it's all realized is just people talking, or more specifically, one person talking to the other person at length about the nature of one of these ideas. Like, this is why a lot of this Angel stuff still fell flat for me, because we're getting a Weeping Angel to talk through someone about a bunch of Division lore, or like at the end, the episode just kind of pauses to have more stuff talked through. It's like when Swarm talked about space versus time, the reason I think this slides off me, at least, isn't just because it's kind of abstract, timey-wimey genre nonsense. It's because it's just words. Like, I don't get a scene where I get an understanding of, oh, this is why space is good or bad. Look at how someone's being compressed into a little room, or they're big and they've got agoraphobia or something. There's none of that. And there's even very little of the time stuff. I'm not really getting it. It's like how arbitrary the different timelines feel in this episode. We're not really getting a big sense of, oh, this is the timey-wimey effect. This is the damage of time or whatever. It's just mostly words, like someone explaining to someone else, this is the big deal. And it's why I think people aren't even noticing necessarily that the time particles and the flux are different. It's because they're both visually getting realized just as these big kind of masses coming and eating things. And it's just in these endless reams of dialogue, which can be fun. Like when someone's super camp, like Swarm or Azure are delivering them, it's kind of fun in the moment just to be hearing this nonsense. But I find it so hard to differentiate stuff when it all does basically boil down to a character is going to monologue at the other character about the big sci-fi thing. There's not an actual scene realizing this visually most of the time. It's just words, words, words.
Yeah, and now with the promise of kind of all this secret forbidden knowledge that the angel has, it's just more of the set. Well, I mean, you know, obviously we haven't heard what that knowledge is yet, but it's sort of the idea that the angel kind of has some more bits of the plot locked away in its head. You know, the angel's in possession, or the rogue angel is in possession of kind of a few more paragraphs of TARDIS wiki summary that we haven't heard yet. And it's quite dispiriting. Yeah,
it reminds me in last series the Cyberium and the Death Particle. It's like separate things again, right?
Yeah, so it's two separate things.
Yeah, and like in Series 11, Desolation and Randscore, like all these things still being separate, even though they seem like intuitively as viewers we're used to stuff connecting. And in this era, we're getting stuff disconnecting, which is, I guess it's kind of interesting. It does keep me on my toes because I can get surprised when things don't connect. Like I was shocked by Randscore because I just assumed, oh, this thing from the early episodes would tie in, and it didn't. It's not necessarily bad, but this sense of different things getting introduced and then not kind of cohering together. It's why I think the big discourse around this series being, you know, it's serialized, it'll all come together at the end. I don't think so, because that's not how these stories have worked before, with the guy who's telling them now. It reminds me so much of some... I know we talked about Neverland and Zagreus and the weird kind of retreading, but with different terms last week. But I think Dark Eyes, the 8th Doctor series, especially the last box set, had a lot of this sense too, where it's like throwing out so many concepts which are kind of achieving the same things, but they're all different, and we have to learn the different lore for them for some reason. And it just kind of, at a point, it becomes noise to me. That's what a lot of Flux is feeling like to me. It's because it's all these words scenes with kind of similar but different timey-wimey concepts that I'm just kind of... It's like my eyes are getting held open and the information is just all streaming in, and it's really hard to cohere in my head because I'm not sure how much it's cohering on screen.
I think that brings it back to kind of what I was saying about like tone again, because that scene where the angel is expositing to the Doctor in Claire's mindscape, right? Like when I look at it in context and its position in the episode, it looks disturbingly similar to all those other times in Chibnall Who where the Doctor's been floating in a void getting exposited at while everything is happening around her. But I think in terms of, in this case, the dreamscape that she goes into, it's quite evocatively realised. It's that cool kind of mirrored, kind of seashore, quite intense Talalay style colour grading. And I think, and the fact that that is kind of aligned with the moment where the story suddenly takes on some sort of personal stakes for the Doctor as well, I think that contributes to a tone and the idea of it being fun in the moment. So it maybe vaguely feels like shit's just gotten real, even though it's basically just the same kind of blobby, just kind of words writing that we've been getting. I think that's why people are kind of enjoying this whereas you aren't, I think, is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, I think that's the way to experience this series, as kind of this very mindfulness type thing where you've just got to take the wins you can get. Whenever you get some enjoyment out of the scene, you've got to embrace that and not think about the payoff, like some of the ardent fans are talking about. I think you've got to think the opposite way, because I think the pattern with this era is that the payoff, even if it works, which I don't think we have much of a sense of why it would, it's going to be delivered in these long monologues in these kind of weird green screen spaces. So the things to enjoy, I think, are whenever we get any bit of elation or fun or novelty across the way. Like I was laughing during the Halloween apocalypse at just how surprising it was to keep getting these kind of trailer-esque scenes out of nowhere in sequence. That was fun It's not something I'd really experienced in Doctor Who before, so I was having fun with that. I was enjoying that. I think we got to take our wins where we can with this series and enjoy it in kind of the opposite way of how it's being touted, as like it'll all come together at the end. It's super serialized. It's kind of funny how, I think the way to really enjoy it is to enjoy this strange dreamscape of the angels where shit is getting real, not because it'll pay off later, but because it's not paying off now. It's being what it is now.
It makes me wonder if Belle having a Lupari ship is going to lead to her connecting to the big Lupari shield around the Earth later, or if that will just be another bit of redundancy, or an excuse to reuse a set, that sort of thing. Like, will it connect or will it not? It's all up in the air. Sorry, go on, Tome.
I was just going to what did you guys think of the Belle, since you mentioned Belle? What did you guys think of the Belle and Namaka strand of the storyline?
It was my favourite bit of the episode.
Okay.
Maybe we'll get some disagreement here, but the scene of Azure, like, it was a little lazily sketched. Like, I don't think the dialogue was great here or anything, and I think Azure suffers a bit without Swarm there as well. But just this idea of kind of in Doctor Who, maybe the rise of the Cybermen thing, where the government guys are all tricking the homeless people into coming to their dooms. Oh, it's even kind of set up a bit like Mad Max 4. Immortan Joe, like, talking about the water on top of this big structure ahead of all the, poor people down below who are getting hoodwinked by this institutional setup. I like this vibe, this kind of satanic vibe of she's kind of brainwashing them with how she's advertising this doom to them as like salvation. Doctor Who's done this a lot, and I think it's a cool and fun idea. It was done very controversially in 2014, I remember. So I liked that. I thought that was a fun setup. I mean, it's the classic Chibnall post-apocalypse desolated landscape, ragtag people slumming around. I know this gets very repetitive for some people, but I don't feel like we were getting Fuscles or Yedlamis here. It was being sketched in a more general sense, where we weren't having to get attached to anyone besides the guy from the In-Betweeners, who I thought was acted in a fun enough way. So yeah, but I think the main reason I get more attached and engaged with this scene, it's because Belle and Vinder, they're not complex characters, but their morality is really clear, unlike some of the main cast. Their motivations are really clear, unlike some of the side cast. Just very coherent characters to go along with. I find it very easy to understand and approach their stories. So I'm having fun with the Belle and Vinder stuff. Although, the last thing I'll say on this point was I noticed our friend Oliver had a tweet where he pointed out, we're 4/6 through the series and we've just set up, we've got a couple that are trying to find each other in a ruined universe. Doesn't this feel like the first beat of a story? Why is this over halfway? It's like we've been treading in backstory for all this time, which is a bit of a weird thing to do in a shorter series.
Yeah, I mean, I do think the Belle and Vinder narrative, like you say, they're very, very easy to sort of follow what's going on, and also they're just very easy to like. I think, Thaddeus Graham is just obviously an immensely kind of charismatic performer, as is Jacob Anderson, to be fair. They're quite easy to just enjoy them being on screen doing what they do. And to kind of her voiceovers and so on, kind of, they've got the usual sort of Chivalog problems, but she manages to make stuff almost work, which, is quite a valiant effort. I think my main issue was just in this episode, more than any of the other ones, I didn't really appreciate the way it kept cutting away to their storyline, because I think the tonal control that Gig was talking about earlier, it just sort of rather gets lost, I felt, when it would jump to sort of, now it's this unconnected story in space, which is good in itself. I like the Belle stuff, but it doesn't, the connection is so not there with this story that it...
What just occurred to me, what would have been interesting is if, instead of Passenger, or maybe in addition to Passenger, if she had a weeping angel with her or something, I don't know how they could make this make sense. Maybe her thing could be not that there's a galaxy where everything's safe. Her thing could be like, with this angel, I can send you back to when things were good, back before all the stuff started happening to the universe. Because angels and salvation feel like a really easy link to make right. And this scene is about her kind of religiously promising salvation. And then the other disconnected stories about angels, it just occurred to me that's kind of bizarre that there's no connection between these, because they seem kind of begging for it in that way. It's an episode about angels, and the side plot is about falsely promising, this kind of religious, heavenly place that you can be taken to by Passenger, supposedly. Yeah, it would have been cool if she had a weeping angel turned rogue division agent, maybe even the same one that was talking to 13. I don't know. It's the same thing in the Halloween Apocalypse, how it occurred to us that tying in the Williams and tunnels would have been really easy to tie into Dan's thing. It's weird to watch an episode and see, couldn't a link have been there? It feels obvious to me, and for it to not be there, yeah.
I mean, I love that idea of having an angel in Azure's thread, just that you brought up. And also, I think it would have been more visually compelling to have an angel up there than Passenger in that lighting and just lifting its face up to the camera, just looking like the cheapest fucking thing I've ever seen. My God. On the issue of cutting back and forth between Bell and the angels and stuff, I felt while I enjoyed the Bell stuff more on my second watch, I think I just took the time to appreciate it more. And I think in contrast to the earlier episodes, while it was, yes, kind of annoying to just kind of keep jutting away from the angels and back and forth, but I think what I appreciated in this episode just generally is just the fairly consistent rhythm of just having angels, 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 Bell, angels, 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 Bell, rather than just kind of hyperactively going move left, right, up, down, left, blah, and in a way that it felt kind of very stop-starty, very kind of. I think last week I felt the cutting around stopped anything from gaining momentum and just made it feel really stilted and just really kind of awkward. Whereas in this time, at least they let things play out for a while before rushing away to something else. So yeah, and also just generally, like I think the music and just stuff like that, it just made Bell's stuff fairly coherent, I think, compared to last time. So go on, Tome.
No, it's maybe more like War of the Sontarans in that sense, rather than Once Upon a Time, because War of the Sontarans, well, obviously they're the two that kind of, bring in the old enemies that are in a sort of fairly sort of standalone plot of their own in a period in Earth's history. Two different time zones are under threat from them at once. And there's a separate spacey arc bit, but there's not a lot of other strands like you have in episodes 1 and 3. So they kind of resemble each other in that sense, I think, because obviously you get the kind of Yaz and Vinder spacey arc bit, is what I'm calling it, separate to everything else. But otherwise, it kind of links up a lot more kind of in a coherent sense of what that whole individual episode is about on its own.
I think one big difference on that front is just that whereas War of the Sontarans basically has Yaz and Dan just get randomly teleported away to their respective plot threads in like the first 5 minutes, this at least doesn't do that. It doesn't try to come up with some pathetic excuse to have the Bell stuff in there. It just cuts away and it's just like, okay, I can forgive that. Like, that's fine. Television can do that. Just one small note about, just before we go on to the next, just one small note, because we were talking about potential links or things that might have been interesting. One thing that occurred to me is that when the angel on the TV is telling Jericho, look away, Jericho, look away, I was reminded of how just that randomly inserted designated characterization moment he gets earlier on. Whereas when the doctor starts talking to him like, oh, Eustachius Jericho, oh, it's under siege by the impossible and you're still trying to figure it out. Wow, that's so like you. And then some sad music starts playing and he's like, I was one of the first British soldiers into Belsen. And that whole bit. And obviously, and you can mock that whole bit or whatever and just how crudely forced in it feels. But the bit later on when the angel's telling him, look away, Jericho, look away. And I thought that maybe they could have done something there with the idea of looking away and kind of looking away from horror or injustice and stuff like that. And the way that, obviously he witnessed something horrific, in history, his experience. And obviously maybe a different episode that gesturing out there, just trying to link the angels to any sort of social context and stuff like that. But it's one of those ideas that just feels like you could have done something with it. And then instead you just get some redundant stuff about how, there's always a better man.
I mean, we've seen how Chibnall writes concentration camps before, so maybe it's a wise thing. It wasn't even filmed in this case.
Darren Mooney's review was quite good. He sort of tried to talk about that element. I think he made it a bit too much of it, but he was saying that, there is this connection, therefore, to kind of these horrors of fascism kind of creeping into society that you kind of, it's warning against how dangerous it is to look away from them and so on, and that this is the connection with Belsen and war history and Jericho's background and so on. But it just feels very underbaked, and obviously the dropping of the name Belsen and making it very specific does feel quite crass when it's up against some made up monsters. It didn't quite add work for me.
I think an episode dealing with those ideas could maybe work, but it's not this episode. This is the episode where the name gets brought up. It's not the episode doing that really cool idea about linking and the looking away stuff like it could have done. And I feel like sometimes when people talk about episodes, it's like we talked about last week, they're kind of talking about this kind of imagined layer on top of the episode. It can be an interesting conversation, but it's tricky when we're talking specifically about the episodes or the writers. Yeah. What else did we think of Jericho? Because he did get, I think, the most characterization of the side characters this episode.
Well, it's a very nice performance. I mean, Kevin McNally is finally in a better Doctor Who story than the Twin Dilemma, so that's good.
I thought he was well sketched. It's that thing, though, like, these characters are maybe easier to do because they're so... We've seen characters like this in a bunch of stories. I'm sure Chibnall and Alderton have. Like, I'm glad that we had a character in the sides in the main village story that was characterized pretty well. But I would have liked it for Claire as well. I was irritated at how, like, it's not just that there's no through line with the Halloween apocalypse. It's just I felt nothing really there at all. The concept of the psychic image angel thing is cool, but I got very little sense of this person besides, she wants the village to not die. Great. Who wouldn't?
Yeah.
And again, the fact that when the angel eventually starts talking through Claire, it's basically it's a full-on possession style, like, it's me, I'm the angel, I'm just talking through Claire's mouth or whatever. And if you contrast that to Series 5 with Angel Bob, where the angel basically reanimates Bob's consciousness to be like sort of this kind of slightly detached relayer of the angel's opinions, like, sorry, sir, but the angel's going to kill you now, yeah. And just the difference there, and how one conveys character and the other doesn't. Yeah, so you just have this angel basically just replaces Claire as a character, pretty much.
I think the scene where the angel sort of talks back to Jericho through his voice, just bring it back around to Jericho again, does work better. I guess partly because he is just a better characterized individual in the first place. But yeah, this idea of kind of... It actually reminded me a little bit of Last Christmas in a strange way. The moment where... Is it Albert, the one played by Patrick Troughton's son, anyway, the older scientist guy, is kind of confronted with this slightly Jungian shadow self of himself on the screen that kind of sucks him through the screen. I sort of got slight vibes of the same kind of idea.
They're appealing enough villains, you can see why they're kind of raised for episodes, even if they get dismissed later on. I've always liked the little cameo appearances, like in The Time of the Doctor. I know some people feel this cheapens them or something, but I think they're not trying to be used as like the big conceptual, we're doing an ambitious evolution of them in the story. It's just like, here's another threat. They're very effective to do a little scary set piece with, and then we move on. Like the Halloween apocalypse in a vacuum, I think the set piece is fine. It's well executed. It's just structurally how it sits in that episode that I find weird. I don't have a problem with little usages of the angels though.
I'm always happy to see them back. Obviously, yeah, I'd rather kind of something meaty, but if you're going to have these... Yeah, sort of, if you're going to have a brief appearance from a kind of favourite monster, then I'd probably rather see a bit more of them than, Daleks and Cybermen that sort of fairly played out, or often quite played out. Yeah, for sure.
I think when it comes to cheapening the angels, I think a cameo is harmless. Whereas if you want to talk about cheapening the angels, of course, making them tools of the division that uses everything and everyone and is everywhere. Well, that's another matter. Yeah, and just that whole idea, it reminds me of what we were talking about just earlier on, and just how everything is interpreted through the lens of jobs. Well, in this story, the division is everywhere and just makes everything into basically jobbers for the division.
They can hire everyone.
Yeah. It's kind of... the fundamental weirdness of it, of course, is that we're dealing with a universe where the Time Lords have been killed off again, but this division that is apparently, as far as we know, is a Time Lord-based organization, it just happens to encompass every species, every planet, all of reality, it's just everywhere. And now it's just come back again. And even though we just had the Time Lords kind of genocided again last series, and it's like, it's just very hard to feel that there's any sense of tangible stakes to what is happening, whether there's anyone behind this or any clear, concrete phenomenon going on. It all just feels weightless and vague and empty, and it's like, what the hell is even happening? The status quo is just so, like, messy.
Yeah, I mean, it's very unclear, isn't it, where exactly the division are meant to be coming from. Is this the division from way back in the past that have kind of broken through to the present, or is this just a division that has survived the destruction of Gallifrey, and they're kind of, that's, I mean, I'm sure it will all be wrapped up satisfactorily, but there's just no real explanation going on there, so we're just kind of left with a sort of confused mass.
The cliffhanger with the angel thing, this, I mean, it's an arresting visual. I know the visual got lots of people excited, and that's cool. Like, it's an interesting effects sequence. It's a great cliffhanger. You know, the
Yeah.
Doctor turning into an angel. That's awesome. But my issue is this is the 4th episode of a series, and you know the 20-something episode of an era. I feel like we've already got a sense of how cliffhangers tend to go here. Like, I know we talked about this in an earlier discussion. The first episode's cliffhanger, that bizarre, you know, one flicking to all these different subplots or setups or characters. We didn't literally see how that was resolved in episode 2, which I have zero problem with. I don't need to see, oh, they got flung through, here's an effects sequence of the TARDIS doing blah, blah, blah. I don't care about that. But I feel like the point of the cliffhanger is to get you interested in what's going to happen next. What's the actual interesting thing about the Doctor turning into an angel besides it looks cool? Like, is she just going to be stuck like that while she gets monologued at inevitably how is going to happen next episode or the one after?
It's the new hula hoop.
Is she just going to be transported like this? Like, I don't really get what the interesting thing about freezing the Doctor into an animate state is exactly. It looks cool, but I don't really get the excitement.
I've seen some people kind of call it, you know, the Empire Strikes Back of the season because of comparing it to Han and Carbonite and all the rest of it. Kind of, he's taken off the board. You know, it's the most desperate bit where, you know, everything's devoid of all hope and the baddies seem to be winning and kind of everyone else has to go rescue him. And I think if they play it as not quite a Doctor light episode as such, but sort of, you know, because the Doctor's been angelified, she's been taken off the board, and so Survivors of the Flux becomes about this kind of, I don't know, you know, assembling all these various different heroic characters like. You've got Yaz and Dan and Jericho in their kind of story in the past. You've got Vinder and Bell in their bit in the future. And then somehow there's Carvanista, the Lupari, and also Kate Lethbridge-Stewart in the present. Then maybe it's going to be something about kind of, oh, well, how do these disparate characters who are all friends of the Doctor across these different times, how do they come together to try and get her back? Yeah. I mean, maybe I'm just clinging to that hope because I thought Revolution of the Daleks might have done something more interesting with the Doctor being stuck somewhere and taken off the board, and then it just didn't. So, yeah, I don't know if that's actually what we'll get or not.
If Jodie's in the next episode much, I assume she's going to stay angelified so they can do the stuff with the other characters like you're saying. And then I assume that means we'll get more stuff like in her mental space, someone monologuing at her or whatever.
Probably.
Which, you know, literally was just last episode. It's like, yeah.
I think the key to that cliffhanger, and maybe its popularity, is just that it's not, rather than it just being a cool visual of the Doctor turning to an angel, I think it also kind of links a few things in kind of a free associative kind of way. Because obviously the disturbing nature of that body horror is linked with the Division as kind of this kind of encroaching force of evil, and the Division, of course, has been associated with really boring imagery. People with guns, you know, maybe some Jadoon running around. So having them kind of be, oh my god, like this actually really fucked up angel, and just the gothic horror of the angels, connecting with the Division that way, and the Division kind of encroaching, returning for the Doctor, claiming her in that way. It makes that idea, just using the imagery of the angel, makes that idea have a bit more, I guess, immediate, visceral, emotional impact than maybe it would have on its own. And I guess that's just kind of, again, like the rest of this episode, really, it's just pure tone. Like, story content is, like, nil. It's just a thing. It's just kind of a sort of a raw, sort of, I guess, a emotional impact that just goes to your lizard brain, rather than an actual setting up of anything in particular for next week.
Yeah, I think there's some interesting kind of potentially interesting thematic stuff you could get into about, you know, obviously the Weeping Angels are typically coded as feminine or female, and the idea of, you know, kind of, I think she pronouns generally used for them. I don't know. You certainly get, you know, the reference to the one being the guy's girlfriend in Angels Take Manhattan, for example, and they're played by women as well, generally, when they've got performers. So I think that's quite interesting, the idea that the first female Doctor sort of gets, you know, her image is distorted in this way, and, you know, the angels are these creatures of power over images, and that's one of the things they can do to her. And it kind of literalizes the idea of the angels as kind of, you know, this sort of monstrous feminine, to use a sort of term that I think has been used to describe them. But yeah, whether that will actually go anywhere, I mean, you know, it's one thing for Alderton to do that, but whether Chibnall will do anything with that in the last 2 episodes, it seems unlikely. Yeah, I think it's more sort of interesting to kind of to think about critically rather than whether we'll actually get anything on that front.
My other issue with the cliffhanger setup would be not the specific angel aspect of it, but it feels kind of like a consequence of the Doctor passively to me. Like, the angels beat her here. Like, they They have a good setup going for how to trap her. That's all fine. But other cliffhangers where the Doctor gets locked away, like in Face the Raven, it feels more naturally an active part of the narrative to me. Like the Doctor gets stuck because of something he did, or in the Pandorica Opens, it's the same kind of thing. But here, I felt like she was just more kind of outsmarted. Do you think I'm right in saying this or not?
She pretty much stumbled into the trap. Like, the Angel hijacked the TARDIS and dumped her in the trap, pretty much, and she just sort of... I mean, she was acting very assertive and authoritative, and a lot of people have said that she felt more doctorish in this episode, and I kind of see where that's coming from. She's throwing out lots of ideas, she's giving lots of commands and stuff, but when they go through the tunnel, well, and that's all they do, basically. They go through the tunnel, and that's it. She's in the trap, she's caught. So in the sense that she's kind of, it doesn't really feel like there was even a fight that was put up here.
Yeah.
She's just kind of, I mean, I think when you have something like an angel randomly hijacking the TARDIS, it just kind of makes the Doctor a bit, fundamentally, I think, kind of helpless, because if you can do that, you can just basically do anything to the Doctor and just put the Doctor in whatever trap you want, and there's nothing you really do about it. So it doesn't really feel like there's much of it. It doesn't feel like a fair fight, really.
Yeah, and it also doesn't feel very clear. This is something that's been bugging me, kind of when the trap was kind of set up or when this deal was made, because nothing that the Rogue Angel seems to do throughout the episode seems to be particularly geared towards getting the Doctor. Like, I suppose what I'm saying is that you get the scene at the end where the Rogue Angel says, "Oh, we've made a better trade," or "We've made a better deal," or whatever, and you just wonder, well, why can't the other angels just take them both? Like, I don't quite understand why. The angel seems to have made this plan, but it yeah, I don't know. That didn't make sense to me.
Yeah, it's weird to think that the Division Squad would honour that agreement in any way. Like,
right?
Why would they do that? Like, they can just capture both the Angel and the Doctor. Yeah, again, it's another thing that it's just there. It doesn't really make any sense if you think about it for more than 2 seconds.
Yeah.
Just one more thing. I thought the mid-credits scene was
yes.
really kind of typified everything, because it's just a classic example. Rather than it being like the stuff it's clearly imitating, like the MCU post-credit scenes and stuff, which are kind of teasers for an audience, kind of a little treat for an audience or whatever. The Vinder thing, it felt like a scene they couldn't fit anywhere else in the episode. So just, oh god, let's just shove it in the credits. And the catastrophic thing about that is it ruined what they were doing with the credits theme, the music, because after the cliffhanger, you get that beatless credits theme. It's like kind of the Adric silent credits moment of this era, I guess, and it's kind of working. But then it gets interrupted, and by the time it comes back, like, it's just, the effect is just gone. Like, the impact of it is just gone. It's like, oh, fucking hell.
Yeah, because you're thinking about, oh, Vinder and Bell and blah, blah, blah. And yeah, exactly. And it also means that the last thing the audience is left sort of thinking about is, oh, will these nice two people get to see each other? Which, it does rather undo, I think, the kind of great big cataclysmic ending cliffhanger. It's like, can you imagine sort of, I don't know, a mid-credit sequence after the cliffhanger of Utopia or something? It would just kind of
Pandorica opens.
Yeah, exactly. It would just sort of totally undo the kind of power of the original hook. Yeah, it was weird. I mean, I don't mind the scene in and of itself particularly, but I like Bell and Vinder, as I've said, but it just, although she really should have said those coordinates earlier on in the call. Jesus,
it's just clunky.
But yeah, it's odd. This isn't really much of a point, particularly that needs as much discussion. But I just found it interesting that there's to do with kind of COVID and safety precautions and stuff. That there's this weird bit in the crowd sequence where Namaka, the in-betweeners guy, says you have to leave a gap between like yourself and other people, or it doesn't take. And it's like this kind of weird, clunky, kind of in-universe explanation for why they're spaced out. I thought that was quite interesting. And I think, you can sort of see maybe more than in some episodes, the underpopulatedness of the village really feels like a sort of, I guess, like a casualty of, well, maybe that's not the right word, but kind of, sort of because of COVID and stuff. And it's not particularly a massive criticism, because obviously, they're making it within a pandemic. But yeah, I think that maybe it suffers slightly for that.
Yeah, I love that type of stuff. I think it's always so interesting, the ways they can paper over it and completely trick you, or the ways they can't. That was a pretty interesting example.
And just before we stop, I want to point out, just in case anyone missed this, like the Angels apparently have a spaceship now that is a big rock.
Meteor.
It's so utterly random, just kind of thrown in there at last minute. I mean, I kind of appreciate the unhingedness of throwing that in, but again, it's like, it's not needed, you know? They have wings!
Yeah, they should fly through. With the kind of eerie blue glow as well, that they kind of, when they're all kind of coming out of it or whatever.
Yeah.
It obviously is doing some things that borrow from Moffat, but it doesn't feel like they're trying to do a Stephen Moffat Angels episode.
No, it's in service to Chibnall's vision. That's like the funny cop aspect of it. Is like the little set piece bits, like them coming out of the drawings and stuff, I guess is Moffat-esque, and like that's the idea of them. But yeah, I totally don't feel this is in Moffat's shadow like the audio is often are. Maybe to its detriment that it's in Chibnall's grand job cop design, but it is a different take on them in that sense for sure.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think ultimately, they do need to be able to move past just being written by Moffat if they are to become, recurring monsters and so on. And so that is good. But yeah, obviously, there might be some wobbles along the way as people sort of struggle to figure out how to tell the same sorts of stories with them.
I think this is why some Moffat monsters haven't caught on in the general sphere of Doctor Who without him so much. Isn't because they're not good enough to. Like the Weeping Angels, the Silence, probably some other ones too. Maybe even the Monks, I think, could have a life outside of him. But the problem is they're either not being used at all, or they're being used in a way that still feels so closely linked into the Moffat episodes, like what Big Finish have done with the Silence, that it still doesn't really feel like their own space to me. But like the Daleks, people use them they use them whatever way they want. That no one's still slaving after Nation's design or anything. And even RTD monsters, like people are trying different things with the Ood and stuff like that. And I feel like that's why they're getting a longer shelf life. It isn't just because like the Ood are a great idea. It's because people feel more comfortable in like to move out of RTD shadows maybe than they do with Moffat. Maybe because his monsters feel more ethereal and that they're very much don't blink, don't think, don't remember. Yeah.
And they're very in service to the original stories they were in, I think, part of it. So quite a lot of his creatures and monsters are a unique set of circumstance that you would just be incredibly contrived to replicate again. Yeah. Like maybe the gas mask zombies or whatever, for one example. You just kind of, how could you do that kind of story again? It would be really kind of clumsy. So I think... And his ones feel a lot less like, oh, this is meant to be a sort of an existing race like the Ood or the Jadoon somehow, where they kind of, you can imagine them having their own culture or world or whatever, and you can imagine different stories of them. Whereas somehow, doing that with the Weeping Angels, and well, we know that Patrick Ness had this idea for Class that he was going to do a kind of Weeping Angel homeworld thing for the second season, which I not to go off on about too much, but I think could have been quite intriguing to see. Yeah. If that could have been a proper post-Moffat version of them, maybe. I don't know. But yeah.
I think clearly what they really need is just a David Whittaker figure to do with them what he did to the Daleks. Basically, just kind of blow them up a bit and make them actually more interesting. But, maybe that'll happen at some point in the distant future. Yeah. But until then, we've got rock spaceships, like the Stones of Blood too,
It's a fun thought. Maybe one day someone will Whittaker up, in the good sense, Whittaker up. Well, maybe someday someone will David Whittaker up the sniper bots, the Stenza, Swarm. It would be very interesting to see a Chibnall monster done by someone else, I think.
This is a bit of a side note. I'm a bit concerned that kind of Swarm might end up going the same way as Ashad, in the sense of, quite a potentially interesting villain that becomes a sort of lackey or something in the kind of latter stages of the plot.
That's essentially already happening.
Yeah, true.
Like that scene with Orsock, who was like, "Oh, they're useful creatures. They've been reintroduced." Like we're clearly gesturing at a much bigger, kind of more fundamental threat. Whatever actually introduced the Flux or whatever. Like we're already getting undermining of Swarm and Azure. So I completely expect they will be summarily dispatched in an incredibly disappointing fashion in the finale, and some other bigger, darker, even more deadly threat will subsume them.
Oh, actually, one thing on the waste thing of interesting creations that I did mean to say earlier was that I was quite relieved that this episode didn't tie back to the Muri in any way, because I don't know if you guys had thought this as well, but there's a lot of stuff floating around about, are the Muri the secret origin of the Weeping Angels, because they were said to be quantum locked, and they were all sort of female as well, and they were kind of had this strange relationship with time and all the rest of it. And yeah, it really felt like he was going to go, I'll just tell the origin story of these Stephen Moffat monsters. And yeah, I don't think I would have been too happy with that.
There's still time.
There is still time for this to happen, is the only... Yes, exactly. And you know, now we might have Angels in a totally non-Alderton episode where Chibnall just goes to town with them. So who knows?
Yeah, indeed. Okay, that's it for this week on the Angel episode. To those listening, like always, please do feel free to comment away. It's always a pleasure to read and respond to comments, whether they're having similar, whether they're having different, whether they're having any kind of response to the episodes and or what we're saying about the episodes. Cheers, we'll be back next week for the penultimate Flux episode. Until then.
Better written. Killer at hope. Better written. Very cliche. Better written. Killer at hope. Better written. Very cliche. But I still felt that story was fairly boring.
That's all this year is. You don't even have to watch it in order.
Better written. Very cliche.